Hello and welcome to the Canada News with your host Divya Roy. Now let's have a look on the headlines. Ontario expanding second dose COVID-19 vaccine bookings to 70 plus starting on June 7. The Ford government had decided to close schools until September, but the issue of reopening schools in Ontario was once again discussed. MPP Gurratan Singh once again raised the issue of halving the auto insurance rate. Now news in detail. The issue of reopening schools in Ontario was once again discussed. The Ford government has decided to school opens until September, but the opposition is misrepresenting it. Premier Ford responded by alleging that all doctors were talking about keeping the schools closed, but the opposition wanted to bring in the Chout web because there were cases before the schools reopened.
Yesterday, the Premier rejected advice from teachers, from school boards, from pediatricians, from his own science table, yet again, and he kept schools closed, but promised outdoor graduation ceremonies literally for every single grade. But schools, Speaker, have said they can't deliver that. In fact, principals say that the Premier's plan, and I quote, is not practical, it is not possible, it is unrealistic, and it is disrespectful. Is there anyone in our schools, in our children's hospitals, or anywhere who actually approves of this Premier's scheme?
To reply, the Premier.
So much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, when Dr. Brown, head of the science table, came out and said we're going to have an increase of 6 to 11%, that equals 2,000 to 4,000 new cases. Now, the Leader of the Opposition may not think that's too much to create spread and create another fourth wave. The difference between myself and Leader of the Opposition, I don't want a fourth wave. Leader of the Opposition wants us to keep going and going and going. I don't. I want to make sure we protect our kids. And as for the doctors, Dr. Peter Juni, I'm going to quote him, Ontario, unlike other places in the world, did a relatively good job. If you compare to the UK, our way of cohorting kids, of masking kids, is much, much better. We have Dr. Juni, we have Dr. Brooks Follis, we have Dr. Dr. Foster, we have Dr. Fisman. So we have a lot of doctors that are saying this is not safe, and I couldn't get a consensus. But we're going to make sure we have a great end of June, great July, and great August for the kids and the rest of Ontarians.
And the supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, this Premier at every stage of this pandemic has refused to listen to the expert advice. In fact, the Premier he made a big show of asking teachers and principals and pediatricians and experts about school reopening, and all agreed to put our children first. Instead, the Premier has done the exact opposite, as he's done all the way along. Alex Munter, the CEO of CHEO, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, says this, and I quote, "Ontario kids have been out of school longer than children almost anywhere else in the world. I am overwhelmed by sadness about all this. It feels like we adults have let our children down."
MPP Gurratan Singh once again raised the issue of halving the auto insurance rate. In response, the Government House leader alleged that NDP had been protecting the Liberal government since 2011, but they were never raised the issue of auto insurance. But now they are raising the issue. He claimed that the Conservative government had always tried to reduce the tax burden on Ontarians, but the NDP had never backed down.
3 years ago, the Conservative government voted down my bill, which would have actually lowered car insurance rates. The Conservative government said that they would act on their own to lower rates, but guess what? 3 years later, just like the Liberal government before them, every single year the Conservative government has been in power, they've allowed billion-dollar insurance companies to increase their rates for Ontario drivers, despite the fact that over the past year we have been in a pandemic, there are far fewer cars on the road, and our roads are safer than ever before. Now, I want to be very clear. Car insurance rates only go up when the Conservative government allows them to go up. So my question to the Premier is this: why is he letting billion-dollar car insurance companies to rip off Ontarians, and why won't he use his power today to mandate lower car insurance rates for drivers across Ontario?
To reply, on behalf of the Government House Leader.
Again, Mr. Speaker, a strange question coming from this member in the NDP. Now, I can appreciate he wasn't elected in 2011 when the NDP held the balance of power in this place, and their only requirement to keep the then Liberal government, which they agree was a disaster, in power, was that they do something on auto insurance. Now, in 2011, that auto insurance rate went up. Did the NDP throw the Liberals out? No. 2012, auto insurance went up. What did they do? Kept them in power. 2013, it went up. What did they do? They kept them in power because they agreed that all that needed to happen was a stretch goal, because that's all that mattered. Mr. Speaker, we understand how important it is to make things more affordable for the people of the province of Ontario. That is why we are working so hard to increase affordability for people, bringing taxes down, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that we have a vibrant economy. On every measure, the NDP have voted against that, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to work for Ontario taxpayers.
The supplementary question, the member for Brampton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. As the auto insurance critic, I've been working and fighting, trying to make sure that this government works with me to lower auto insurance. Many times in this legislature, I talk about how high auto insurance is in Brampton and Brampton North. We pay some of the highest auto insurance in the entire country. I've written to the Premier, I've written to the Minister of Finance, asking them to help to lower auto insurance and make life more affordable for Ontarians. However, sadly, Mr. Speaker, I have heard nothing from this government. The government cannot sit back idly and do nothing. I've talked to taxi drivers, I've talked to truck drivers, and they've also said that they can't continue their business because auto insurance rates are too high. The Premier has said, and my member mentioned as well 3 years ago, that they would lower auto insurance, but they have not lowered auto insurance. Insurance rates continue to go through the roof. Now, the member opposite says that it's a stretch dream, it's a stretch goal to lower auto insurance. I want to ask the government when, or actually why, have they not been able to lower auto insurance for the people of Ontario and give them a break, which they need right now?
Government House Leader.
Yeah, I'm glad the member opposite agrees how ridiculous accepting a stretch goal is to reduce auto insurance rates. What's even more ridiculous is that member and his party accepted that as a condition of keeping the Liberals in power between 2011 and 2014.
Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie congratulates all Pride Month residents. He said that this Pride Month would be celebrated on June 15 by lighting the clock tower. The Pride flag will be hoisted at the same time. He said that this time the program will be hosted virtually without much gathering.
I first want to start by wishing everyone a happy Pride Month. In Mississauga, we celebrate and embrace our 2SLGBTQ+ community. Diversity, equity, respect, inclusion are at the core of our city's identity. I'm proud that on June 15th, we will be lighting our clock tower, multicolors, and raising the Pride flag high here at City Hall. Although we can't gather together this year as we normally do, we still have big plans to celebrate our 2SLGBTQ+ community. On June 15th, I will be hosting a virtual Pride celebration with Fluffy Souffle, a Toronto drag performer who is passionate about supporting 2SLGBTQ+ families and gender-variant children. We also have a great author who will be speaking about art and other initiatives. Please visit mississauga.ca/pride for more information about these upcoming events. And now on the COVID front. I'm so proud of how far we've come these last few months. We've made huge strides in lowering our case counts and flattening the curve. Peel is averaging 100 cases per 100,000, and that's down from 171 cases per 100,000 just 1 week ago. Mississauga is averaging 81 cases per 100,000, and that's down from 147 just 1 week ago. We haven't seen case counts this low since mid-February, early March, or even last November. Our R factor, which tells you how many people a COVID-positive individual will infect in our community now sits at 0.66. I'm also very relieved that the situation at our hospitals is stabilizing even further. Trillium has 50 COVID hospitalized.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh discusses his party opposition resolution. He also mentioned about the steps being taken to take concrete steps for recolonization with the indigenous people, to include the indigenous and recolonization report.
And all the hard work you put into this. I want to thank all the survivors and the warriors and the advocates for children. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's always so difficult to continue to have to share your trauma, but I thank you for doing that. Thank you for your courage, your resilience, and for your words that you'll be sharing with us. Today, we are debating our Opposition Day motion, and in it, we are calling for action. As Charlie said, the discovery of those 215 Indigenous children buried in Kamloops has shocked the nation. It has left people reeling. People are in horror. But people are also coming together in incredibly powerful memorials, commemorating and reflecting on those children, but also reflecting on what that means about our country. And people are now saying very clearly that it is not good enough to fly the flags at half-mast. It is not good enough for the federal government to just express words of condolences, particularly when they are still fighting Indigenous kids in court, particularly when they're still fighting Indigenous survivors in court. So what we're calling for is concrete action. What we're calling for is stopping these legal battles against Indigenous people, stop denying them their rights, respect the ruling of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, work with Indigenous communities instead of fighting against them. And we also want to see the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission put in place, 94 calls to action. These aren't recommendations, these are calls to action. And in this moment, when we are reeling from the horror of this discovery, Canadians are demanding action. We are demanding action. And we're going to hear today from people directly impacted by this Liberal government, who on one hand tries to express condolences about the horrific discovery of Indigenous children being buried at a residential school, these kids that were killed in a genocide, and then in the same breath are fighting Indigenous kids in court and fighting survivors in court. And this cannot continue. We're going to have a vote on this motion, and we will see where people stand. If they stand with Indigenous communities, if they stand with and for justice or not. With that, again, thank you so much. Je veux remercier.
Instead of accepting the advisory panel recommendation to end the mandatory quarantine hotel program for international travel to Canada, the federal government is preparing to impose higher fines on those who try to avoid the program. Government says police will raise 5,000 fine for violating Quarantine Act. The current fine is 3,000. Some travelers prefer to pay 3,000 instead of going through the quarantine process. Under the quarantine process, they get tested at the airport for COVID-19 and then stay in the hotel for 72 hours and wait for the result. The Public Health Agency of Canada says 798 fines were imposed on those who refused to quarantine the hotel from February 22nd to May 7. Of these, 606 fines were imposed in Ontario and 192 in British Columbia. There is no record of fines being issued in Quebec and Alberta. International flights are still allowed to land in these two provinces. The Senate has unanimously passed a bill for a constitutional holiday to commemorate the tragic history of residential schools in Canada. Bill C5 was expected to receive royal assent. Arrangements have been made to celebrate the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30. The bill was swiftly passed in both houses of parliament after 215 Aboriginal children were found in common grave at a former residential school in Kamloops, BC last week. With the passage of this bill, a special day will be constitutional holiday for the employees working in the workplace controlled by the federal government and the federal government. Stephen Gilbert, Canada's Heritage Minister, told the Senate on Thursday that the aim was to make Canadians aware of the dark chapter in the country's history. It was also be a day to remember the survivors of residential schools, their families and their communities, as well as those who have been passed away. It was also demanded by Truth and Recolonization Commission and Indigenous leaders. Ontario says it's planned to open up bookings for a second dose of the COVID-19 to individuals 70 years and older ahead of the schedule, those aged 70 and over, as well as individuals who received their first dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine on or before April 18, 2021 can book their second dose appointment using the provisional booking system or by calling the provisional vaccine booking line. The move is being made a week ahead of schedule due to an increasing supply of vaccines. According to the province, some public health units who are using their own booking system may expand eligibility sooner. York Region became the first public health unit to accept appointments for anyone aged 70 and up back on June 2nd. Now let's talk about the COVID situation. Peel Region Medical Officer Dr. Lawrence Law reports on the COVID-19 outbreaks in Mississauga. He said the positivity rate in the city this week was 7.8%. Dr. Law said although the situation is improving, but still precautions cannot be ignored. He also said that B11.7 new strains were seen during the second and third wave.
Mississauga's weekly incidence rate for COVID-19 currently stands at 81 per 100,000. with a test positivity of 7.8%. Things are starting to look favorable, but we cannot grow complacent. I urge our residents to remain vigilant despite the improvements in our trends. Like all of you, I too want to exit out of the acute phase of the pandemic and enter a new reality where COVID is no longer the novel threat that it is today. But here's the situation, and we've been here before somewhat, where between the second and third waves, we saw B117, now called the Alpha strain, replace the previously dominant wild-type strain of COVID-19. That Alpha strain then drove significant misery during the third wave that we just endured through April and May. And as that third wave resolves, our science table colleagues have advised that we are now seeing a similar replacement pattern with more and more B1617 in the Peel community, known as the Delta variant, originally detected in India. The Alpha variant is receding, but the Delta variant is increasing more and more, with 97 cases detected to date in Peel since surveillance for this variant started at the beginning of May. The science table's analyses, which are preliminary, show that Peel is ahead in this replacement. The Delta variant is anticipated to be the dominant variant in Peel within 4 weeks and within 8 weeks in the rest of Ontario. We must thus remain careful, and we cannot afford a fourth wave driven by the Delta variant in our community. Fortunately, the one thing that is different now and in our favor is that we do have broad one-dose vaccination coverage. 72% of our adults 18 plus at our last count, and over 40% of our youth aged 12 to 17. And this is really a testament and thanks not only to the teams that continue to vaccinate steadily out of all of our clinics and our hospital partners and out in the community, but to all of you in the community who have rolled up your sleeves.
Ontario's Chief Medical Officer Dr. David Williams provides weekly updates of COVID-19 in the province. He said that 2,302 cases were found positive during Monday's update. 699 cases were recorded on Tuesday. He also said the more than 700 cases were recorded on Wednesday. This has led to an increase in number of cases being recorded on a daily basis.
So it's Thursday. How are we doing? Where are we since Monday? We're looking at the time, it's the peak time when we see effects of the long weekend. And we want to look at how our data is doing and then what's happening in the weekend coming up. Since our last update on Monday, we've reported 2,302 new cases of COVID-19. That means we saw on Tuesday, we recorded 699 cases. Then on Wednesday, we were up to 733 cases. And today, 870 cases. This slight increase could be attributed to the May long weekend. We also comment in a moment of our last data, our percent positivity has come down, but our data may indicate that we may be up a little bit higher again tomorrow, maybe close to 900. So that's concerning as we watch this trend, and hopefully we can turn that around as soon as possible. The current 7-day average for COVID-19 cases is 940 as compared to 1,441 last week. So I don't want to take away from the fact that we have seen excellent improvement in our numbers over the week, but this recent uptick is a bit concerning. Deaths, as we'd like those really to drop down even more, we still saw an additional 44 deaths since Monday. This includes 10 deaths related today, bringing the 7-day average to 15, which is down from 21 last week. And as always, we want to extend our sympathies to the families who have lost and friends who have lost loved ones, because each one is a significant loss to each one of these areas and families. And we would like to have these numbers down to 0 if we could. Hospitalizations continue to be an issue that is showing slow improvement. The occupancy does remain high, and the numbers are steadily improving though. Today, there are 729 people in hospital.
Quebec is reporting 279 new cases of COVID-19 today and 4 more deaths attributed to the novel coronavirus, including 1 in the past 24 hours. Health officials says hospitalizations dropped by 10 to 307 and 67 people were in intensive care. Montreal was the region that reported the most new cases today. The province says 95,704 vaccine doses were administered. About 63.6% of the Quebecers have received the first dose. So that's all we have in this bulletin. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more updated news.